Hi everybody, welcome to week 4. I'm starting out in Schoology, which is where you should be starting out every week. You should pop in here and look for the calendar and of course the video instructions. Now I'm making the week 4 video instructions are going to go right here. Like for you to notice that we're in September. Everything in August is still here, and 3 weeks of video instructions are here. If you did not submit your notebook on Friday, shame on you. It goes here. Some of you tried to email it to me and other things, and you're welcome to do that, but you still have to submit it here because, you know, this is the only place I have to grade it. And there's instructions for how to do that inside when you click this. We are now in September of 2020. I'm going to go ahead and click that and open that up for the calendar. One thing I'd like for you guys to start doing, well, it's up to you, but I like to click this little button right here. It expands it out so you can see the whole thing better. Another thing I'd like for you to notice is that this is the repeat of week 3. This is week 3 from last week. It was also in the August calendar, but this week had 1 day of August in it, so it overlapped, so I'm throwing it on here too. But we are not in week 3, we are in week 4. Now week 4 starts out with Labor Day. I'm actually recording this on Labor Day. So, you know, we don't have any school that day, and you don't have school that day either just because you're in virtual school. We're going to jump on down here to Tuesday. Now Tuesday, what I'm asking you guys to do is this lab. It's an activity. It's called using a microscope. The problem is that Edmentum has a little pack of stuff that if we could afford it, we would have bought and sent home with you, and it would have had inside of it an actual microscope and slides and all kinds of other fun stuff. But since we didn't do that, there's a part of this lab that you can't do. That doesn't mean that there's not information in there, so I want you to go through it. But read this. You cannot do the actual lab because you don't have the microscope. So we're just going to read the information, and actually to help you out with that, I created this video here that carries you through this activity a little bit slide by slide. I'm going to start doing that with some things, but what you need to do is watch it with me as I talk through, and then also go back and look at it on your own. Okay? Alright, so today we're going to click on this and we're going to watch this video, and I have another video here on types of microscopes. It's all really important. Since I've already carried you through that on this video that you're going to watch separately, whenever you're ready, you click that and you watch it. It's pretty short. It's only like 8 or 9 minutes. I don't even think it's that long. Okay, but it'll really help you out. And so I'm going to drop on down here to Wednesday. Wednesday there's a tutorial. Okay, now this tutorial is going to be on what we call the basic units of life, and I'm actually going to go ahead and click through that with you. It's gonna, you know, I don't know if we're gonna get this thing done in 10 minutes today, but I'm gonna do that. Before I do, here's a link to the guided notes. I'll actually show you where the guided notes are also inside of the tutorial. There's a link here to a video called The Grand Cell Tour by the Amoeba Sisters, and actually one called The Wacky History of the Cell Theory. These are outstanding, and yes, I need you to watch them. Okay. Over here we have some that are optional. We have a video on cell structure, a video called Cells Everywhere, and there's a web page that does a little bit of EOC review. You guys can do this now. We're all going to do it as a group later. If you have time, you should do everything, you know, inside of this week. But and try to make time because, you know, you're in virtual school. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click on this tutorial, and it's going to put us right here. On the left you can see the table of contents. I'm going to close that, but this has 37 pages, and so we're going to go through it a little bit more quickly. As I close it, I want to show you one more thing. If you didn't click the link on the calendar just now, but you still need to get to the guided notes, click here, and here's the guided notes. If you click them, you will pull up a page that is printable. Okay, so this is the guided notes. I want to show you those real fast. There's some vocabulary. Yeah, that's important. You know, fill out the vocabulary. Some of them are already filled in for you, and the rest of them you need to fill in. That's why I like this, because you don't have to write every bit of it, but we do want you to do some of the writing. In addition to that, there is the objective. It's found right here on this next page. So, you know, fill in the blank from the objective, and then keep going. The history of the cell theory, all these blank spots. You should love this. If I was you guys, man, I'd be like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. You mean I don't have to write every single word? but this is crucial. This is stuff that you need to know, and I realize it is what was that, 6 pages, 5 or 6 pages? Yeah, I know, but you got to get it printed out. Print it out in color, why not? You're using somebody else's ink, and fill it out. It's going to be a good thing for you to use to study with and review. Okay, back to here, we're going to keep going. Page 4 is a table of contents. I know you can look at that. Yes, you have to answer this question when it loads. Okay, the cell theory states that all living things contain one or more cells. Why do you think cell theory meets the definition of a scientific theory? You have to go back to one of our first videos, and if you did the notes and you've kept your notebook up, you should be able to find out why the cell theory meets the definition of a scientific theory. Do you think it should be a scientific law? Explain your response. Yes, I need you to write there. Page 6 is another question. An antibiotic is a type of medication that cures infectious diseases. Why does the word antibiotic suggest that these medications would be ineffective against viruses? This is you might want to look this up. I don't know how much of this you've studied so far, but I'll give you a hint. Antibiotics only work on cells. Close that. Listen, you guys need to be answering these. A lot of you guys are skipping these and you're getting poor grades on the tutorial. When you guys look in Skyward and you see your grade and you have anything less than 100 on this, it means you're not completing these very well. You need to complete them totally and get the full grade. Okay, I want you to do well in this class, and I want you to do well in the EOC, and it means you have to do the work. All right, moving on. Page 7 is just an introduction. You can ignore it. And page 8 is like a title page. Ignore it. So, page 9, we start talking about something called the cell theory. I want you guys to keep something in mind. It wasn't that long ago, 500 years ago. I guess that seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago that we had no idea what cells are. We had no idea about things like bacteria and amoeba and anything smaller than we could see with just our own eyes, or what we call the naked eye. And then something crazy happened. The same guy who invented telescopes also invented the microscope. And as we started to look around, we found out that, holy cow, the cells are everywhere, and the body, any living thing is basically a bunch of cells working together. So they work together, they produce a function and a structure together. Okay, kind of like clockwork. But how do we know something's alive? So we've got some basic characteristics. Things like all living things are made out of cells. This is a given. This is, to me, one of the most basic. You definitely, if you are a living thing, you're made out of cells. There's no questions asked. Now, there are non-living things that are made out of cells. Things, for instance, things that are once dead. And then we find cell-like shapes in other types of things like rocks and stuff like that. But one of the basic rules of all living things is that all living things are made out of cells. All living things have some type of a boundary separating the inside from the outside, and it's important there because that helps us to maintain an inside and we call that homeostasis, meaning maintaining a stable internal environment in spite of changes in the outside. You maintain homeostasis with your boundary by regulating your body temperature. If the temperature goes up outside, your body starts to do things to cool off. If the temperature goes down outside, your body starts to do things to warm up. And a main part of that is the main boundary around you called the skin. All living things use energy. That's just a given. They have to. Some living things like plants and other photosynthetic organisms use the sun's energy to get and make their own food. They're called photosynthetic organisms, or autotrophs, and these autotrophs can collect sunlight and make their own food, right? And then they eat that food, and isn't that awesome? Now we are not photosynthetic or autotrophs, so we have to go get our food somewhere else, and those are called heterotrophs. Okay, that's another day. But all living things use energy. All living things have an internal organization that helps to carry out basic functions. You have your internal organs and stuff. Animals have that. Plants have that. Even fungus and single-celled organisms all have a stable, or all have an internal organization. And another thing is that all living things grow and develop, and you grew and develop. If we were in class right now, I'd find the shortest kid and say you didn't grow as much, but you still grew and developed. And as you're growing and developing, you do this by adding cells or replacing cells. Everything in our body has to do with cells. You get bigger by adding more cells. Your cells don't get bigger. You just add more cells. So when you grow, it's not because your cells got bigger, it's just that you added more cells. In addition to that, if you cut yourself, your body heals that by growing more cells. And so as you develop, your body also adds more cells. Everything has to do with adding and replacing cells. All living things eliminate waste, and you know that. You have a excretory system, and so as we digest, plants eliminate waste. Fungus, bacteria, everything has a way of getting stuff inside and outside, okay? And also, all living things respond to a stimulus. If we were in class right now, the kid who looks the most asleep, I would have slapped his desk and said, see, he responds to a stimulus, or she. But if you were to step on that tack, you're going to respond. And even bacteria, even trees respond to outside stimulus. Now if you go up to a tree and you jam a tack into it, you may not see that response, but there is going to be a response. The tree does something around that tack or the hole that was produced by it. Now here's this word homeostasis again. I talked about it a minute ago, but I just want to remind you, it literally means same situation is what homeostasis means. And in spite of the outside, everything on the inside stays the same. With humans, it's all about regulating body temperature, pH, that sort of thing, how much hydration our body is. Not enough, we're thirsty, we add water. Too much, and we get rid of it. Other organisms, other types of organisms such as plants and things, they regulate homeostasis somewhat differently. Single-celled organisms use their cell membranes or cell walls to regulate homeostasis by basically controlling what comes in and goes out. And that's really what homeostasis comes down to. You control what comes in and goes out. And then finally, all living things reproduce, and that's important. You can imagine that if a species of living organisms stopped reproducing, it wouldn't be very long before they completely disappeared. So it should be a pretty, this one's easy, all living things reproduce. They have to or they wouldn't be here. Page 14 was another question, please do it. Page 15 is called the cell theory timeline. The first thing it talks about are all of the parts of the cell theory. This is important. You must know this. There are 3 parts to the cell theory. All living things are made of cells. That's important. Every living thing is made out of cells. That's a given. There's no argument. But we had to discover that? We didn't just always know that. Somebody had to discover it. The video that I want you guys to watch, called The Wacky History of the Cell Theory, here, it does a very good job of explaining this. So it wouldn't hurt for you to watch that maybe right now, or make sure you go watch it later. Another thing is that cells are the basic units of all structure in every living thing and all organization in every living thing. So when we talk about building living things, all living things are made out of cells. You're made of something like 37 trillion cells. Of course, bigger people have more, smaller people have less. And so when we talk about building living things, whether it's a single cell organism made out of 1 cell, or sequoias out in California made out of hundreds of trillions of cells, every living thing is made out of cells. And finally, and this is kind of weird, but cells only come from previously existing cells. And even back, if you go back and watch this video, where's it at? Right here. If you go watch this video, you'll see that even back in the 1700s or 1800s, they were arguing that no, cells can just pop up out of nowhere. And we know today that's not true. You get cells from other cells. And that's something I want you to roll around in your head and be wondering, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And I want you guys thinking about that. By the way, did you know that you could come over here and press play and it would read this whole thing to you? I don't know if you knew that or not. Page 16 talks about 2 types of microscopes. Of course, without microscopes, we wouldn't be able to see cells. And so as a result, we didn't know anything about cells, so we didn't have the cell theory until the microscope was invented. If someone were to ask me what are 5 of the most important things ever done by humans, I would say that inventing the microscope would be one of them. It was just an incredible thing that opened up our eyes to so much about science. Okay. Anyway, we're going to talk about 2 types of microscopes. These microscopes here, the compound microscope, use light. The other types are the electron microscopes, use electrons, and they have, when you get to the video on the microscope lab, you will hopefully, if you've already done it, you'll know there's a difference in these 2. I'm going to go very quickly. Compound microscopes use 2 lenses to bend light and to magnify light so that we can see things as much as 2,000 times their original size. It's incredible how much we can zoom things in on, but even that still isn't enough. So we invented an electron microscope in the early 1900s, and This thing actually, instead of using light, it uses an electron beam, and that electron beam bounces off the specimen, and you can see in an even unbelievable, like millions of times the size. There are some disadvantages. The disadvantage to the compound microscope is, we get pretty good magnification, but this gives us great magnification. So in that case, the electron microscope wins. But there's something different. There's two bad things about the electron microscope. One is they're expensive. We're talking about millions of dollars for one electron microscope. That's what this thing is right here. Actually, you know what? I don't think that is an electron microscope. This is a compound light microscope, and it can be expensive, but even some of the most expensive compound light microscopes still pale in comparison to the electron microscope. So winner compound microscope, because they're cheaper than electron microscopes. And there's one more reason to use compound microscopes. To use an electron microscope, you actually have to spray paint it with like aluminum or gold or something. And guess what? It kills anything you're looking at. So when you look at something with an electron microscope, you're only going to be looking at things that are dead. They've been fixed to some type of thing like a slide, but they've been fixed to it with this metallic spray paint. With compound microscopes, we can actually look at living things and watch living things move around, and they're unbelievably fascinating. When I was in college, we spread apart the toes of a frog and we put it under the microscope, and you can actually see the blood vessels moving through the capillaries in the frog's fingers, and it was really cool. So two types of microscopes. Okay, you'll learn more about those inside the... I'm probably about halfway done here, so if you need to take a break, now would be a good time to pause this. Page 17 kind of carries you through a timeline of developments in the cell theory. The first microscopes came out prior to the 1600s, around 1560. The video on the wacky world of whatever will tell you a little bit more about that. We discovered cells in the late 1600s. We discovered single-celled organisms. Then the people involved with doing this are, you should read about that. We've got Robert Hooke here, Anton van Leeuwenhoek here. And it was well into the mid-1800s, these German scientists, Schleiden and Schwann, they started forming the cell theory. Along comes another guy named Virchow. And you can click on that and it'll show you all these things. I really want you to read through all of this. You know what? Yeah, Schleiden here, Schwann here, a guy named Virchow here. Read through all of this. It's really, really important. But these are things that helped us to understand what happened, or to discover cells and come up with this theory about how cells make up all living things. As we started looking, we found out that there were two really, you could divide all cells up into two groups. Really small ones called prokaryotes, and really big ones comparatively called eukaryotes. And when I say big, remember, we still can't see these without a microscope, these eukaryotes. But you could imagine like an eukaryote being like a big beach ball. You ever played with a beach ball? Most eukaryotes are big because they're full of organelles, but if they were the size of a beach ball, a prokaryote would be about the size of a marble. So the comparison of the two is that the prokaryotes are way smaller than the eukaryotes, but that's because the eukaryotes are very complex. Okay, so when you think of animals and plants and fungus, they're eukaryotes. They have what we call eukaryotic cells, something we're going to be talking about here shortly. The prokaryotes are easier. They're very simple cells. They're the bacteria, and that's it. I mean, all bacteria are prokaryotes. They're very old in terms of life on Earth, and they are very, very simple. But when you get sick from a bacterial infection, this is what gets you sick. Is a little bitty guy, kind of looks like this. It's a scary looking thing. By the way, for example, COVID is not either one of these. COVID is a virus, and viruses do not have cells. They're made out of something very small. See that little stuff inside of there? That's called DNA, and viruses are really just a little piece of DNA wrapped in plastic or protein or something. So this is an activity on page 19, and you're going to start out by watching this video, Archaea and How DNA Began, and this is going to kind of go back to this page and show you how we got these very simple prokaryotes and how the DNA got there. Okay, and then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about DNA in the next unit, but you kind of have to watch this video and answer some of these questions. So watch, pay attention, and you got a few questions to answer there. And yes, please do this assignment, because I can't give you a good grade if you don't. Okay, so we skip page 20. We're going to go straight to page 21. This is on cell structures. Cell structures are the little bitty things inside of the eukaryotic cells, they're like, you have organs inside of you. Well, these things kind of do the same thing except for the basic miniature cell, and so we call these miniature organs or organelles. Prokaryotes don't really have that many organelles. They may have one or two, but for the most part they're really simple and basic. It's the eukaryotes that are full of the organelles. So let's take a look at them. So here are, this list are all of the organelles that we're going to be talking about in the eukaryotic cell. This is a this is really a plant cell. You can tell because it has a cell wall. It also has chloroplasts. We'll talk about those shortly. Animal cells do not have cell walls or chloroplasts. Okay, so let's just jump into it. The first one is the cytoplasm. That's this green stuff. It's kind of like snot, and it's what everything floats in. It's mostly water. It's also got some other stuff dissolved into it. If it weren't for the cytoplasm, yeah, this thing couldn't function at all. So cytoplasm is really important stuff. It's the thick, snotty-like stuff that everything floats inside. You can imagine this cell as being like a water balloon, except instead of filled with water, it's filled with snot. Okay. The next part is called the cytoskeleton. We don't see much of it here. Animal cells don't have as much cytoskeleton as plant cells, but it acts just like structure and support. All it is just hard points throughout the cell that things kind of grab a hold to. Okay, I mean, imagine if you had to swim around here and move around. It would be nice if you could have something to grab onto and hang onto, and if you needed to move, you could grab it and move onto it. That's what the cytoskeleton does. And then the last one on this page is the nucleus. The nucleus is the heart of the cell, the very center. It's not always in the center now that I think about it. And by the way, cells can have more than one nucleus, but inside of this nucleus there's something special. It contains the DNA, and this is the information storage and command center for the cell. And I don't know, if this were a city, this would be the courthouse where all of the information is stored and where all the orders come from. Okay, moving on. If you're a plant cell or if you're a fungus, and actually some prokaryotic cells also have it, like some bacteria. So lots of things, not just plant cells, have a cell wall. But a cell wall is very thick. It's made out of something called cellulose, and cellulose is the same thing that paper is made out of. In fact, paper is what it is the cell walls here. Trees are cell walls, and if you look at your house, like I'm looking at the wall that I built in my house, and it's made out of wood. All this stuff died inside of that tree once we cut it down, but this cell wall remained. And so yeah, pretty much everything in my house is made out of cell walls of plants. Chloroplasts are found in plant cells. That's why we're putting all this together. These act like solar panels. They let the cell collect sunlight and convert it into an energy source called sugar, specifically glucose. And then glucose moves all around the cell. Now we're going to learn about that process a lot more later on, but it's important that you know that these chloroplasts absorb sunlight, and the plant then takes carbon dioxide and water and mixes it up and turns it into sugar and has a little bit of oxygen left over, so it just throws it away. I want you to start thinking about that. Now, all cells have mitochondria. All eukaryotes have mitochondria, including plants. To be clear, like humans or all animals don't have chloroplasts, so we can't absorb sunlight. Wouldn't that be great if we could just walk outside, lay in the sun for a while, and smack your belly and say, I'm stuffed? But only certain cells have that, like plant cells and some algae cells, which aren't plants, and a few other things. But with every eukaryotic cell, that's everything that's not a bacteria, they have something inside of them called a mitochondria. Now, if the chloroplasts are like solar panels, the mitochondria are kind of like generators. The chloroplasts will create sugar, and the mitochondria will then take that sugar and burn it to release energy. And that's a whole other process we're going to be talking about later on. One of my favorite words, these are vacuoles. Vacuoles are found in all kinds of structures, but mostly in plant cells, and they act like warehouses. They're a place to store stuff, whatever you want to talk about it. These vacuoles basically are just big empty chambers in which plants can store things. Sometimes they'll store sugars or oils or other things that they produce. That's what goes into vacuoles. Nothing, don't think any more about it. Great big storage areas. And in a lot of cases, by the way, as much as 80% of the internal volume of a cell, plant cell, is the vacuoles. Okay. The ribosomes are interesting little guys because they make proteins, and every Every eukaryotic cell has to have ribosomes. Some have a bunch, some only have a few, but they make proteins, and this is going to be something we talk about a lot when we get to DNA, because protein production is the point of DNA. In fact, some people say that's what cells do, is basically make proteins. Well, this is where they're made. Now there's two places. Ribosomes are floating around freely, and in a minute we're going to show you the Golgi apparatus in which they're kind of attached to it. But remember, ribosomes make proteins. I think of it like this: ribosome, is like a rib, and rib is meat protein. So that's how I think about it. Okay, we're going to talk about endoplasmic reticulum, and I lied to you a second ago. I said that when the ribosomes are attached to something, they're attached to the Golgi apparatus, and boy, was I wrong. Your teacher stinks. Actually, there's two types of endoplasmic reticulum. Please don't think you have to know that word. We just call it ER. And the ER is just like this network of tubes in which things are produced. The one type of ER is called the smooth ER, and it's where we produce things like lipids, like fats and cholesterols and other things for the cell. But one type of ER is called the rough ER, and the rough ER is rough because it's got ribosomes all over it. Remember ribosomes from just a second ago? Ribosomes make proteins. Well, the rough ER is just one great big huge protein production plant, and I mean it produces them all day long, right? So when you think of ER, think of like big factories that produce stuff. Rough ER makes proteins, smooth ER makes everything else. Now we get to the Golgi apparatus, and the Golgi apparatus is kind of like UPS. Its job is to take things that the cell produces and kind of wrap it up in basically the same thing as a cell membrane. Kind of puts a little bitty miniature cell membrane around it in here, so that when it gets to the edge, it can kind of merge with the cell membrane and squirt it out. Somewhere there's a video that's really cool about that. The Golgi apparatus, you can think of it as kind of like FedEx or UPS. They will process, package, and then secrete products from the cell and try to shove it to the outside. Okay, and that's what the Golgi apparatus does. We're going to talk about some things that are kind of specific to just animal cells. I mean, not always. I mean, you find them in other things too, like protists, which are single-celled organisms that are very complex. But lysosomes, they're kind of like the garbage men. Their job is to go around and kind of clean up the cell. So they're like little miniature garbage trucks, and they'll take all the trash that the cell's created, and they've got enzymes that help to break it down, and either they break it down and recycle it, or they package it up and throw it out. So very much like waste management. Garbage trucks come to your house and clean up the mess. Centrioles are these tubular cylindrical things. They're very important when it comes to reproduction of the cell. At one point, this cell is going to kind of split down the middle and divide in two, and the centrioles play an important part of that, and we'll get to that later. And then on the outside of the cell, you might have a very long whip-like tail. It's called a flagellum. You might have seen this on things like a spermatozoid or something like that. Or like instead of one big long tail, they have a bunch of little bitty small hair-like projections called cilia. Both of these are involved in helping the cell to move around. So yeah, animal cells have those, especially the flagellum. And you may find them also in things like prokaryotic bacteria and eukaryotic protists and things like that. But just so you know what they are, they're just found on the outside and they help it to move around. Now, every cell is surrounded by the cell membrane, or what we also call the plasma membrane. Now, the cell membrane is what we call a lipid bilayer. Now, lipid is a fat, but this fat is very interesting because on the outside it has a head that is actually kind of attracted to water. We call that hydrophilic. Hydro meaning water, philic meaning love. Hydrophilic head that wants to orient towards a liquid, a water-based liquid, and there's a tail on it that is what we call hydrophobic, which is the exact opposite, meaning it wants to orient away from water. And so if you put these things together, they're actually going to create what we call a bilayer. You see a layer on the bottom and a layer on the top with the tails in the middle. Okay, and so we can have water on the outside, water on the inside. This is the outside of the cell up here. This is the inside of the cell up here, down here. And then they separate the cell. It makes an incredibly effective barrier. Okay, and it's only because of the nature of the lipids, where the head likes to point towards water and the tail likes to point away. So you put two layers of that with the tails pointing towards the middle of the layer, and you got a really neat situation in which you have a good, solid, controllable skin around the cell, and the cell has the ability, for the most part, to control what comes in and goes out. Now you'll notice there's these things kind of embedded in there. Sometimes things can move straight through here, all right, but sometimes things have to have help. And so these integral proteins, and you'll see them all over the place back here, they're kind of like holes in this wall, or I'm sorry, not wall, this is a membrane, not a wall. They're like holes in here that help things to go in and out faster. Now you can't just anything go through there. Some of these are electrically charged and only let certain things through there, and some of them, you know, are designed to, a lot of them are designed to only let certain things through, like salt, for example. So these, man, this stuff gets really complex, but just think of it as very simply like a, well, they're actually called gates. So you can think of it as like a gate, or kind of like a pump maybe. If it moves stuff, what we call active transport, it can actually pump things in or pump things out. All right, that's the cell membrane. There's just a whole nother page talking about that, but you can see again the outside of the cell, the inside of the cell. There's the little lipids, there's some facing out and some facing in, and the little tails in the middle. Then you'll notice that there are these things embedded in it. And right now, just for this, all you really need to know is about what's in, you know, there's stuff embedded into the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, and they kind of float around. They move around, by the way. They're not just fixed there, but they can move around. But they help things get into and out of the cell. Page 29, 30, and 31 are questions, and then just another, you know, placer page. And then right here at the end, they're going to talk to you about viruses a little bit. And so let's talk about viruses briefly, because viruses are interesting. They are not made out of cells, so we do not consider them living. Now, as of this recording, and I don't know how many years I'm going to use this recording, but as of this recording, we are in the middle of being quarantined for something called the COVID-19, or a type of virus called a coronavirus, and this particular one is called strain 19. Viruses are incredibly small. If a eukaryotic cell is a beach ball and a prokaryotic cell is a marble, then a virus is like a speck of dust on that marble. They are unbelievably small, and yet they've probably, well, I know they have, more people have died from viruses than any other thing on earth. So something to read about. Now here they're talking about Zika. I don't know if you guys remember Zika from a few years ago, but it was something that could get into humans and cause some birth defects, since we were really worried about it. But there's always some kind of virus going around, and knowledge of how viruses work, knowledge of how they spread, how we can stop them, is very important. And I love talking about viruses and this type of stuff called epidemiology. Viruses are not living things. They have some of the characteristics of life. They have genetic information, they reproduce, they're organized, and they can adapt, but they don't have cells. They don't reproduce on their own. They can only reproduce with another cell. Their genetic information is either DNA or RNA, but not both. They don't grow. They don't get bigger. Once they're put together inside of a cell, they stay the same size. They don't possess any internal organization or anything to perform biological processes. Inside of there, there's not all kinds of organelles and stuff. It's very small, and it's basically a delivery mechanism for DNA or RNA. So, and they also don't use energy or release waste. They're very much like, kind of like maybe like a crystal or something, but on an unbelievably small scale. And yet this is this type of thing, and I believe you'll notice that this is, if you were to look at this under a microscope, you would see a circle with little dots sticking out of the side, and that is, it would kind of look like a drawing of a sun. And so in Latin you say corona for sun, and this very thing here is a coronavirus, one type. You know, there's all kinds of types of coronaviruses that we've had around for thousands and thousands of years. Just this particular one that we're fighting now, COVID-19, is a brand new strain we've never seen before. Page 34 is a quick little assignment about viruses. Read it and do it as well as you can. And then of course there's a summary on page 36 that I guess is a video summary, and then page 37 ends it, and that pretty much gets you through cells. And I know this took 35 minutes, but I think it's a good, well spent 35 minutes. When you go through here, if you'll complete the guided notes as you go through, then you've done a pretty good job of getting through this assignment. I just carried you through this tutorial and those guided notes. Watch those videos there when you can. And there is a mastery test on the basic units of life, and that's all open right now. And at 35 minutes, I'm going to say congratulations, we made it. See you next week.